I thought I'd probably start at the beginning of Oliver's story, actually, which is there. So we found out at his 20-week scan, ultrasound scan, that Ollie had cardiac rhabdomyomas, and I guess that really put a different slant on the pregnancy. That, you know, it was our first pregnancy and we're all really excited, and then suddenly we were rushed off to Monash Medical Centre to genetic testing and or to genetic screening really, because genetic testing at that time wasn't readily available. Emma and I were both being checked over, and then they sort of suggested that it was most likely a spontaneous mutation in Oliver, and I guess we didn't really have a great deal of time to sit back and take it in much at that stage, because you know, he needed lots of monitoring during the pregnancy. He had big cardiac tumours, and they were worried that they were going to occlude his cardiac outflow, so the blood moving out of his heart. And he went through, his growth sort of slowed down and ended up having an emergency caesarean, which sort of, you know, was good. He got out safe and had some time in special care nursery. But what complicates it more is Oliver's a twin. So he's the one on the right there, and you can see he's quite a bit skinnier than his, on the left. He's quite a bit skinnier than his twin sister Eliza. And that's where about that time is where our relationship with the Royal Children started. So we were here on our first day out of the maternity unit, and Ollie had a Holter monitor on and has been monitored closely by the hospital ever since. We had a unique perspective of his development because we had, I guess in a science term, a case control study going on. We could always see how he was performing against Eliza, and you know, from pretty early on it was obvious that his development was a bit different. Very basic milestones, walking, crawling, were always behind her. And even early on his feeding wasn't as good as what Eliza's was. His first real symptoms came around about 18 months. He started to have seizures, and we were being monitored pretty closely because of the early diagnosis, and ended up coming in through a neurology, meeting Simon, and going on a range of different medicines to try and get his seizures in control. And when we were finding photos, we sort of looked back at around that time, and you know, he was really sort of struggling with seizures a lot at that, around 18 months. He had a regression in his development, but Ollie's a bit unique in lots of people with epilepsy and tuberous sclerosis. So at that time, and sort of up until very recently, he's had a normal brain MRI, so he doesn't have cortical tumors, so he wasn't a candidate for surgery. We got good control of his epilepsy on Sabril and Trileptal, and at that time, and sort of reflecting back on, you know, the first one of these events I came to, which was where they were talking about these new drugs, the mTOR inhibitors, that might in a lab show some promise. Then at around, was it around 3? At around 3 years old, Simon started him on an mTOR inhibitor. And that was a great move for Oliver, so that helped with his epilepsy control, and a few times when he's got sick we take him off it, and it's really profound the difference that it has on his behaviour as well. It was used off-label, and the Royal Children's, which means there's no subsidy, and the Royal Children's actually supported in paying for the medicine, and we're very thankful for that. On the right picture, one of his early, I guess, it's not really a complication, but the effects of the sirolimus was he had a rash on his face for quite a while, which was probably a bit eczema, a bit infective, and after a lot of work, and actually our paediatrician suggested some techniques they use in infected eczema, we managed to clear it up. That's Ollie with Freya, his young sister. And you can see the remains of the rash around his mouth. So Ollie, has developmental delay. His behaviours at that toddler age were pretty difficult. He injured my shoulder because he had this thing where he wouldn't stop running and he'd drop to try and get away from you. We went through the screening for intellectual disability, and he has a mild intellectual disability and ADHD. He's got autism and lots of sort of idiosyncrasies and challenging behaviours. Going through that assessment, though, was really important because it opened doors to funding and therapy and things like that we weren't able to access before there. So he's been through the range of the FAXIA funding for autism and early intervention before school. Through that process, and I guess a tip we have is, we've built a pretty solid medical team around him. So he's got the range of his GP, his paediatrician. He's had 2 speech therapists, a neurologist, a cardiologist, an ophthalmologist. He's got a renal physician. One of the ones that's been really important the whole way through is our speech therapist, who's sort of helps you maintain what's normal with Ollie. So he'll be antagonising his sisters and fighting and pulling their hair, and then Sue will go, but that's just normal 8-year-old behaviour. Like, that's what they do to their sisters. Emma does an amazing job coordinating everything. The work she does, getting everything together, is really important, and that's the hardest bit around being in Melbourne and not having a designated clinic is that there is a real lack of coordination across the system. Of course, he goes through all the normal screening, and that comes with its own risks. He had a suspected aneurysm identified on one of his screening tests, which meant we went through a whole different barrage of tests, but he doesn't have an aneurysm, which is good. Kindergarten and school were 2 very different processes we went through. So he went through mainstream kindergarten with an aide, and that was, a great experience, and he was really well supported by his aide. He uses an aide as a tool, though, so he will not do things, he'll get his aide to do them for him. He's very cunning. We got to the point of school, and one of the disappointing things with the system heading through to school is that, you go to schools, speak to people about it, and their response is always, oh, it's really the parents' choice. And, Ollie's really not safe, or at that time was really unsafe. And, you'd say, well, what sort of supervision will he have? And they're like, well, it'll vary, it'll depend whether we can get people, all those sorts of things. And we made the decision to go down the special school route, because of his mild intellectual disability and because, it's a really safe environment. So he's in a class with 6 or 7 other kids, and that's them on camp. One of the weaknesses, I think, of the education system is they're not very good at explaining to people what the benefits and weaknesses of different parts of the system are. And the special school system struggles a lot with people's preconceived ideas and innate prejudices against it. But it's a fantastic environment for Ollie. He's reading, he's doing maths, he's doing all the normal school things in a normal school environment. So behaviour and sleep have been his two biggest challenges, and Ritalin and melatonin have been our two biggest saviours. We have learnt as he's got older to kind of understand his needs and his wants and things like that. We read the same book every single night. He listens to the same Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg song every single night. So, you know, his routine is very fixed. But once you kind of work that out and no one sits in his chair in the lounge room, then, you know, we all get along as a normal family. He does hate birds, though. He's got an absolute hate for birds. And if you're at our house at 5:30 in the morning, you'll often hear a scream of, "Why are the birds waking me up?" So the future, well, what seems insurmountable now, in a few months or a few years, it will be, you know, a thing of the past. He was a boy that wouldn't sit still for a haircut, and there he is. He's had a trim and told the hairdresser what he wanted and was very, very pleased with himself. So what next? Well, we get NDIS in 2018, so that will be our sort of next milestone. His school's set, so his school is a P12, so you know, that's one less thing we have to worry about, and he'll continue to grow and progress and live his life as, you know, other kids at his school and his siblings do. So thank you.